Awesome. Well, I'm super excited to have our speaker here today, our guest here, Nikhil Cherian. He is a results-oriented omni-channel retail leader with more than 10 years of experience leading key growth initiatives at the world's largest retailers. And his focus is to build teams that utilize data science expertise and product mindset to deliver innovative, customer-focused, and digital ad merchandising related solutions, also supply chain solutions and strategies to increase revenue and transform the business. So his background is very diverse, mostly focused in supply chain space, and of course, as a very good professional angel. We also want to highlight that he is a first-generation immigrant that came to the U.S. in 2011. Right now, he's a vice president in one of the largest retailers in the U.S. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Nikhil. So Nikhil, why don't you give us another rundown of your background, the one that, that's not so condensed in the 30 seconds. I know there's so much more layers of the onion we could peel in your story and share with others.
Yeah, sure thing, Micy. Firstly, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. So I live in Seattle, Washington. I just moved here, in fact, maybe less than a year ago, after having lived in Bentonville, Arkansas for almost 10 years. I used to work for Walmart, as you know. That's where we met. Walmart and Sam's Club have been a big part of my life and my family's life, and I've learned a ton from them. All 10 years that I've lived in the US, have been in service of Walmart, either directly or indirectly. I used to work for a startup called Mu Sigma. Back then, it was a small analytics data science startup. A really passionate bunch of folks wanting to solve problems without necessarily the domain expertise, because the whole paradigm was learning over knowing. That was a very and the reason I mentioned that it's a very foundational aspect of my life that has allowed me to go into areas that I do not have expertise in, supply chain being one of them. So I learned a lot of foundational problem-solving frameworks there that's kind of helped me through this journey. On the family side, I have two boys, my wife and two boys. We all live in Seattle. Like I said, my boys are 8 and 4 years old. They're the center of my universe right now. It's a lot of fun for sure. Yeah. And I'm from India, a city called Hyderabad. Massive, millions of people. I don't know how many exactly, but at least 6 to 7 million people. So I come from a very big city. All my family lives there. I'm the only person in the US. The only person I have, even from a distant relative standpoint, is this one cousin that lives in North Carolina, but pretty much everyone else is in India. So
so you're just a little better than me in terms of the amount of relatives in the US. Of course, I'm married now and I have my husband and his side of the family, but I'm like the only person in the US. I'm hoping to have my brother and sister come here join me. It is a different feeling when you have your blood relatives, close relatives here. And
that's the part that I miss the most, to be very honest with you.
Yeah, families. And I know that in India, I've never been to India, but all the Indian friends I have, they have 10 cousins or 20 cousins, and they grow up together. And so I'm sure that you have grown a very close bond with the family and cousins and friends over in India, and now developing new relationships in the US.
That's exactly right. Like you said, I had dozens of cousins. But obviously, as families got smaller, now I have an older brother, younger sister, and they have kids, right? So my kids have barely seen them. So that's one thing that I wish, it could have more freedom, to your point, right? As an immigrant, I do feel pretty constrained in terms of being able to either meet my family or get them over.
Yeah. And there's many layers of complexity I had to deal with. Being in the US, whether it's budget issues or visa constraint and their schooling and different things. So yeah, it is a lot more difficult. They're over ocean away. So thank you so much for sharing that. That's an emotional connection a lot of us can resonate with. So what I want to dive in a little bit more on is, how did you come to this country, first of all? I know you came here right after college, and not really right after, but maybe just walk us through that, and what were some of the key challenges, and why did you want to come?
Yeah, it's a great question. Right out of college, I went to school for engineering, so I'm a mechanical engineer by schooling. But India has this big IT services industry, and a lot of us would join. I mean, these are good, reliable IT jobs, even though you're a mechanical engineer or whatever, civil engineer, etc. It didn't really matter. All these companies needed, is people who can think on their feet, who can speak English, interact with clients, things like that. And so they would take you to these giant training centers, right? They basically make you live there for a few months, and they teach you everything from what is the computer to how to program mainframes in 4 months, right? So that's actually where my wife and I met, right? Because there was at a given point in time, there'd probably be like 10,000 people getting trained, right? And then deployed across the world to the Walmarts and to the, Kroger's or whatever companies of the world. So I did that for a year. I learned a ton in terms of just basic technology. And then a year later, I decided to come to the US to pursue my master's. So I went to the State University of New York at Buffalo to get my management and information systems master's degree. At that point, I had no clue about the geography of the US, where Buffalo, New York was, or how New York is different from Buffalo, New York, or Seattle, or any of those cities. Totally unaware. And this was in 2008. So I applied, I got into a bunch of schools. I chose SUNY Buffalo for reasons I don't remember now. But once I got there, it was pretty tough having to go from a really tropical climate, hot climate, to one that snowed a ton. I made quite a few friends, as you do in college, right? It was a fun experience. But overall, after I graduated, I didn't really enjoy the whole experience of having to go through all these hoops, right, to really land a job. So as an example, you would have your OPT and CPT and H-1B, etc. And that I felt was very constraining. So I didn't even apply for any of these. I said, I'm going to head back to India, and people are going to roll out the red carpet, and they're going to make me the manager of something, right? And when you're young, you're naive. You think everything is going to be handed to you in a platter just because you have an education. So I went back to India, and it was a recession, and there weren't a lot of jobs, especially for somebody who was fresh out of college. So I ended up joining a very local Indian manufacturing company that, going back to my mechanical engineering roots, that manufactured radiators of electrical transformers, right? Now go figure that, from IT to doing this.
Very different.
Yeah, very different. So it was production floors, working with, the labor force, and, clients who wanted to make sure that their massive electrical government projects, etc., are on time and on budget, etc. I learned a lot, but that wasn't the place for me, because there were some shady things that were happening that I personally, based on my convictions, I cannot be a part of. So I ended up leaving there in 6 months without a job again. And that is where Mu Sigma happened. So Mu Sigma is, like I said, an analytics data science company. At that point in time, I had no idea what that even was. Even though my education was in information systems, data science was a very nascent industry. It wasn't really being taught in schools at that point in time. And so that Mu Sigma basically brings you in, similar to the other concept, the IT concept that I mentioned, where they teach you everything. Mu Sigma was the same. They hired people who had a head on their shoulders, and you could interact well with people, who can work well in a corporate environment, and basically taught them everything about data science, right? Statistics, and how to program in SAS, and solve retailers' problems. So that was my introduction to Walmart. And so Walmart was my client. I worked on several merchandising applications like assortment optimization and pricing and things like that. And that is how I got to Bentonville. It was a client location, and they shipped me to Bentonville to work with the clients. And then, one thing led to another. And, I was able to make some really good progress with the company.
Mm-hmm.
I credit that primarily to my decision to stay put in a very small town. At that point in time, Bentonville was obviously 10 years ago, much smaller than even it was today. It is today, sorry. But the opportunities were huge. I mean, this is the world's largest retailer working on thousands of problems. Every problem you touched was worth billions of dollars. But obviously, it's very difficult to navigate such a big company. It's not a small, nimble company. But because I had kind of grown up in Walmart from an analyst all the way to a director, etc., I was able to connect the dots pretty well, right? And I couldn't see it, but my leaders saw that I was able to do that and gave me opportunity after opportunity. As an
Mm-hmm.
example, we did some really cool work in pricing. Walmart obviously is known for pricing. We rolled out some really world-class ways to optimize price, figure out how to deliver low prices to our customers. Then somebody said, hey, come on over to supply chain, which again, I had no background in supply chain. And the kind of problems we were solving there was just unbelievable, meaning figuring out the life of a strawberry was one of my projects. So basically, I would have to figure out how long a strawberry would live after it's been harvested from the field. And then how could we guarantee freshness for the customer once they take it to their homes and to their refrigerators?
Mm-hmm.
That involved a lot of time studies and
Yeah,
measuring IoT technology, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of really fascinating, cool things that I learned there.
that's awesome. Well, I think that's a really good intro. Kind of from a timeline standpoint, from you got out of college and then you came here for the master's degree, and then how you grew your career within Walmart and now with Nordstrom and as the VP. So maybe can we dive a little bit deeper into why did you come to the US for your master's? You couldn't get a master's degree in India. Was it and I asked that because you immediately returned to the US almost after you finish your program. So I how how many job challenges there are in the US, and you didn't want to go through that. So
Yeah.
what was the reason you came the first time, and what was the reason you came the second time? Did that change? Were you pursuing the American dream? I would love to learn more about that.
I've thought about that question a lot, Micy. Why? And I've come to the conclusion that, nothing in my life has been planned, meaning planned by me. Meaning I have never thought to myself, oh, I want to be in the US or I want to pursue the American dream. Life in India is tough, no doubt. We weren't rich, right? Neither were we dirt poor, but we were, I would say, relatively on the world scale, we were probably poor, but we were pretty happy, right? I mean, my parents never pressurized me to, go to the US or make money. In fact, I was thinking the other day, I don't think I've ever heard my mother, push me to go make big money or make a big career, etc. She always pushed us to be good people, right? Uh, my background is very heavily Christian. Um, my grandfather was a pastor for 65 years. My mother is now a pastor for almost 30 plus years.
Wow.
So they have very less interest in, the American dream, typical American dream as we know it, the materialistic dream. But one way or the other, even though I had not made big plans, God has been kind to me, has blessed me, and has allowed me to be at the right place at the right time, I want to say. So to your specific question about why I came to the US for the first time, in the first, instance, that actually was not planned. Meaning all my friends at that point in time were applying for master's education in the US. And I was working for this company, like I said, the IT company. And a buddy of mine just spoke to me multiple times and said, hey, you got to come. We're all going. We don't want you to be the only guy left behind. So we want you to go. And he literally filled out my applications. I'm not even kidding you. Filled out my applications. He sent it out. Obviously, I was sitting right next to him, but I was not really serious about it. And then once the admits start rolling, the aid and other things started coming in. One thing led to another, and I was in the US. And so the second time around, it was the thirst to solve big problems, because Mu Sigma, like I mentioned earlier, had really instilled the passion to solve really big problems using some simple first principles based problem solving methodologies. And I was really enjoying myself, right? And so the opportunity to work with clients directly, face to face, on a daily basis, one on one, versus sitting, 7,000 miles away, working in the hours of the clients were sleeping. I wanted a different experience, and that got me to Bentonville. And believe it or not, I was married the second time when I came to the US, and I told my wife, and I decided 3 years and we're back. So because we really wanted to be with our families and we enjoyed living in India. But guess what? Life and God have different plans. So here we are after 11 years, and
Yeah, it's hard to plan. Yeah, I think when I thought about my dream and in the US, how I think I had all these big plans actually, but I don't think things went the way I planned. So it was kind of the opposite. But my plan was based on just dreams. It wasn't really based on any realities of
right.
how the world was shaped. So that's very interesting how you let God guide you throughout the process. And and in terms of American dream, I think it's a very subjective definition. And I actually looked this up before. It has American dream has evolved a lot throughout time as well. And it's a really subjective definition. What would you think if you were to think about today, what does American dream mean to you? Like in the US, or do you feel like you've already achieved it because you really didn't have much expectations, but you were given so much, right?
Yeah. No, that's a great question, and one that I think about a lot. When I was younger, and this was like maybe when I was in school, people would ask me, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would say the 4 M's. This was my way of sounding really smart, probably dumb now that I think back. And it was money, mansion, Mercedes, and maiden is what I would say, the 4 M's type of thing, right? I don't know where I heard it. It was probably silly and childish, must have been on TV. But now that I look back, 25 years later, I think it is the American dream is to live a life of significance rather than a life of success. What I mean by that is, it is relatively easy to make a materialistic fortune in America, but very hard to make a difference in people's lives, because it's a very individualistic culture where everybody is just focused on their lives and their well-being in general, compared to some of the cultures that you and I come from, which are very communal, cultures where others have inputs in your life, you have inputs in other lives, you're constantly pouring in. So to be honest, I haven't completely figured out what that means here in the US. But I'm very active in my church or in the lives of my children, my wife, etc. Or in general, to be able to help other people through the journey that I've been. So if, hopefully I've been hopefully I've been a good mentor to a lot of people over the years in terms of advising them on the decisions that they're looking to make, or career choices, or just connecting to the right opportunities, etc. And also allowing them to see the bigger picture in all of this. Is at the end of the day, you're not going to take your riches. Your colleagues are most likely not going to be crying at your funeral. So you really have to take a step back and understand for yourself, answer for yourself what it means to lead a life of significance.
Yeah, that's very refreshing to hear. And I love that you pointed out. I mean, in this country, there's definitely people that haven't been able to amass the wealth
Yeah,
under the belt. But I think if people were given the right tools or right mindset, or and also give it, try to work for it themselves and work with others, they can make it happen. And that's so much easier than those that look for
yeah,
the significance. Because as I'm getting success in my career and my business, people ask me for advice as well. And sometimes people are just so focused on, well, how can I get to the next step? How can I do those things? And they aren't really thinking about what are the bigger pictures. And it's refreshing that you mentioned that.
yeah. Because I'll give you a couple more nuggets if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
And so things that I've been like thinking for the last couple months here. Um, and I've realized as I've gone through my career, I'm a VP now. So technically, you would think that I would think rather that, oh, I've arrived at a certain level in life, and now I'm very satisfied and happy, right? The truth is, I think we confuse achievement with satisfaction, and that's not necessarily highly correlated, right? People think, oh, when I get to such and such city, when I get to such and such level, I'm going to be happier, or people are going to be impressed by me, etc. The reality is that's never true, right? So you have to figure for yourself what is it that you're on this earth for, and what are the drivers of your satisfaction. So, as an example, for me, you know, am I doing my best to keep my family happy, right? To raise kids that we're proud of, to be a good part of the community and contribute back to the community, right? Am I doing my best to be a learner myself and constantly grow myself? Things like that. Is how do you look at it from a holistic perspective? So one thing I've started doing recently, and this may sound silly, is I have a scorecard for all these things that I just mentioned. Am I doing my best to A, B, C, D, E? And it is actually, I think, 10 items. And I rate myself every single day on all of those aspects. So, did I do my best to keep my wife happy today and keep my children from being exasperated? 1 or 0, just binary, right? It's not a relative number, so it's 1 or 0s. And that has allowed me to keep everything in perspective. There are days in which I go to work and my day is terrible. There's escalations across the board, things aren't working, we're losing money, etc., etc. But when I get back home, you know, my family doesn't really care about any of that, right? They still want their dad, they still want their husband, they want me to be present, etc.
Mhm.
So, going back to my scorecard helps keep that in perspective. And then another day comes and work is going great. Everything's awesome, right? Everyone's high-fiving each other, high-fiving, patting me on the back, saying, your team's done a great job. But then I go back to my scorecard and try to say, okay, did that really matter in the larger scheme of things?
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I tend to get very focused on the career and different things. And sometimes, if I'm not careful, it becomes my identity a little bit. And my husband is like the opposite. So he helps me keep things in balance, in check, and he reminds me, smell the flowers along the way. I mean, you can't wait for 30 years to live your life, whatever that might be, retirement, or
Yeah.
until you get to certain places, career. Well, so yeah, enjoying the
Sure.
presence and knowing those areas is key. I resonate with
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So another thing we didn't get to dive into is your career map. I know you've spent a large chunk of your career in the U.S. with Walmart, and now with Nordstrom, and you've been blessed in given those opportunities to move up. But also, I'm sure you worked hard and worked through challenges, especially being as a immigrant, first generation immigrant, you had to maybe overcome cultural differences and different things like that. So how did you, so first of all, what do you think were the major challenges, maybe one or two, that you had to overcome, and how did you overcome them?
I think one of the major challenges that I still have to this day is going by the definition of the American dream, is just freedom to move anywhere or to take any job that I want. And that's severely restricted by, as you know, visas and immigration statuses and so on and so forth. So if a lot of your viewers are Indians, they probably would identify with how hard it is to, get onto a permanent residency in the US. And I still, I'm in that journey. So that's severely constrained my opportunities, I would say. But no complaints, right? I'm pretty glad with, where, God has placed me. In terms of opportunities, I've had several opportunities, like really good ones that have come by over the years, and the company loves me, I love them, like it's a mutual, love that's going on there. But at the last minute, they find out, oh, we don't do visa sponsorships, things like that. So it used to bother me a lot, right? But then to my earlier point, God is probably predestined already, right? When you get to where. So that's been a bit of a challenge for me over the years, for sure. And then being on a visa also doesn't allow your spouse to work. I don't know if you knew that, but
Yes.
now my wife has been, and she's glad to be doing this because we have 2 boys and she's happy to stay at home and take care of them. But the spouse is not allowed to work. So she had a great career at Google and Yahoo and other places in India, but in the US, she's not necessarily been able to, work. In fact, we may finally be able to do that this year. But the boys are at an age where, like, she wants to continue pouring into them at a young age. So that's been the biggest challenge, I would say, in terms of just the freedom to take up any job that I want. Like, as an example, if I wanted to drive an Uber today, right? I have a job as a VP at Nordstrom or whatever job that I have. Technically, I couldn't do that, right? And so that always bothered me a bit, to be honest with you, because you feel like you're giving so much to the country and so much to the corporations of this country, and don't necessarily feel like you're getting that back. But hopefully we'll get that sorted soon. And Nordstrom has been great in helping me solve for that problem.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. I had to go through that too. In my first 4 years of my career after my college, I was essentially in the same job, different jobs in the same company. Well, I'm grateful they gave me the opportunities and things, but my salary was basically stagnant, and I didn't really, I think it was more up to me. I didn't felt like I should take a risk and look for other jobs because of the constraint you mentioned.
Absolutely.
But you're a great example, though, of, regardless of all the visa issues you had to work through, like, you were still able to achieve, growth in your career that provided for you and your family. And I'm sure it's been impactful for others around you as well, not just because of the monetary value, but also the impact you're making, right? Like, people seeing that immigrant like you, who has done so much for this country, was able to rise up, and they, like me, I'm seeing you as a mentor and in the space, and you did so much. So it's a lot of impact that you're making just by sharing your stories. And I always like to focus on the positives. We can't change immigrations and what the company do, but there's so much we can do. So I love that you made all those strategic moves in your career to do that.
The only thing I give credit to for that is just a passion to solve problems and ask for more. I've always done that. I've tried to do that rather. So my bosses were always on the back foot trying to figure out, okay, how do we keep this guy engaged and give him more and more? And didn't necessarily ask for promotions, right? But when they see that passion, and it's probably an immigrant work ethic, is my guess, just like you, um, you know, the sky's the limit, right? You keep getting more opportunities, and America is amazing that way. Is that, as they call it, the land of opportunities. I've really truly seen that to be the case here.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Focus on solving the problems, the others will come. And that's essentially what entrepreneurs do too. You can't just expect people to give things to you. You have to solve a problem, and even in the corporate world, no matter where you're at. Yeah. So as we're coming towards probably the last few questions of this podcast, well, I'm going to ask you a few other questions, more of other firing runs. So I think we covered this already, but feel free to recap or answer the questions a little bit differently. What is your life mission, the underlying motivation behind everything that you do today or in the past decade or since you were little?
Yeah. And as I mentioned earlier, my mission is more from leading a life of success to leading a life of significance. And I'm still honestly trying to figure out what that means. But right now, it means being a role model to my children and other immigrants, as a business leader who leads with integrity.
That's very good. Very good. And if you were to do all this all over again, would you do anything differently from your career in the US, your story in India, in the whole life?
Yeah. That's a tough one because you don't get to go back and litigate your choices. But if I had to, I probably would have stayed back in India and been closer to family and friends.
Oh, that's interesting. Actually, I didn't expect to hear that. Like your answer reminds me of I don't remember which successful leader it was, but someone, I think it was Buffett, was someone, they might have said something like, there was many things I wish I had done differently, but one of them would be spending more time with my kids, or so similar to your story, to be closer to family. And it's very interesting to me. It shows that you're playing a significance in the relationship you create with people you care versus just the monetary value. So that's very interesting. I guess it also helps others put in perspectives over the success you'll have. What sacrifice do you have to make? Think about it ahead of time, and you have to be really okay with those sacrifices that you have to make.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So next question, kind of in the firing runs of questions, is what book has the greatest influence in your life?
Apart from the Bible, which obviously has had a big influence in my life, I think the second one would be a book called Extreme Ownership. It's a book written by two Navy SEALs, I think Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. There's some really good leadership principles that have followed me for several years and have really actually helped me in my job because they've been super practical. These guys were on the field in Iraq, and have been business consultants for many years. So they do a really good job in the book of covering a war story, and then for the same leadership principle, a business application. So 10 principles, 10 war stories, and 10 business applications. It's a really well-written book and an easy read that has had a significant impact on my life.
That makes sense. And as you rose to become more leaders versus just task completion based work, you want to take extreme ownership. People can see as a problem solver, complete owning that problem. That makes sense. And is there anything from the Bible you'd like to share as well, since it means so much to you?
Yeah, the one chapter that I've been, listening to, reading almost every single day the last couple months is Romans chapter 8. And speaking of freedom, financial freedom, or the American dream, etc., kind of puts everything into context for me. And it basically says there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, right? So it's not about what the world thinks, or the the guilt that we have as people who have fallen short of God's glory. It is primarily that, Christ has died for us, and then now there is no condemnation, right? So that's something that I try to remind myself, that it doesn't really matter what I'm going through on a daily basis and who thinks of me, but really about, me being blessed to be, a disciple and a son of Jesus Christ.
Wow, very nice reminder. Thank you, Nikhil, for sharing that, especially something you've been, thinking about and been going through for the past few months. So,
And as I'm going through this, I'm thinking maybe I should be a preacher. Maybe I'm in
well,
the
you do
wrong.
have a history in your family to be preachers, and it is a life of significance that they tend to leave. So,
Yeah.
and one thing that when I was speaking with others, right, like that one of them was also very successful in her career. She doesn't have a plan, and for her life, because there's many ways we can be shaped and molded to make a significance in the world. Like I don't think of you as just the leader of supply chain. I think of you as so many other layers, and they all could make a significance in this world. Yeah,
Absolutely.
so the next question is, what is your number one piece of advice you would give to anyone looking to achieve more control over time and financial and career, and live the American dream, to the definition that you have?
Yeah. I would say three things, and these are actually not my own. I read it in a book and it's kind of stuck with me over the years. Is number one, maximize your youth. When you're young, work hard. Balance is kind of a myth when you're young. Sweat equity gets you faster, ahead faster than watching others sweat. One example is playing a sport versus watching sports. Huge difference, right? A professional sports person earns significantly higher than the people who are watching him or her play. So working hard while you're young, not confusing hard work, is number one. Number two is relationships. Double down on your best relationships. That's the investment with the highest return. So figure that out. If it's your wife, your kids, your spouse, your better half, whoever it is, or your parents, your cousins, relatives, whatever it is, make sure you invest in those relationships. Don't forget that in the pursuit of your American dream. And number three is get fit. Right? The most common thing among Fortune 500 CEOs is that they work out every day. Right? It's not that they're super smart. Not all of them are super smart. Not all of them are good people leaders, etc. But the one thing that they have in common is that they work out. So fitness is really important because we tend to forget, that the body is a temple and that we ought to take care of our bodies. So those are three things I would say. Do those three things and the returns would come.
Thank you. That sounds like a great strong foundation for spiritual, mental, physical as well. Next question is kind of a fun question. I ask people who maybe have a different cultural background. Do you have a dish or anything from your culture that you like to share with the audience that's super fun and you think it's worth sharing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, India is all about food. Food
Yes.
is so many cultures and so many states and languages, etc. So we've ended up with a ton of food. But if I had to choose one thing, it'd probably be a dish called biryani.
Yes.
Biryani is a meat and rice dish. It's slow cooked, usually traditionally slow cooked over firewood with a lot of Indian spices and herbs. And oh, it makes my mouth water.
Me too. Just by you mentioning the name, yes. I enjoy having those at the Indian restaurant. Maybe one day I'll visit India. That sounds great.
It's kind of tough to find good biryani. I've had it in a lot of places, restaurants in the US. My wife obviously makes a really good biryani. But in Seattle, I found a couple restaurants that are really, really good. So that's one thing that I can eat every day.
Yeah, I think I can probably do too. Great. In case our listeners want to contact you or follow you somewhere, when I say follow, meaning social media wise, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you? Obviously, we don't want you to have to deal with 1,000 messages, but just in case they want to get to know you a little bit better.
I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's the only social media platform, to my knowledge, that I'm in. I've tried Facebook and other things, but I stopped that a decade ago. So LinkedIn is the only place that I'm in.
Got it. Awesome. So feel free to connect with Nikhil on LinkedIn or follow him. On LinkedIn is in the follow button as well. Great, Nikhil. That's it for today. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your stories and some of the answers I didn't expect, but I think it was really good perspectives that I and maybe other listeners needed to hear. So really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, Micy. I enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
Thank you.